School District. Mr. Takei will be interviewed by Huntington Beach local and award-winning communications consultant, Jen Cullen-Williams. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy this afternoon's program. Jen, let's begin.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, George, for being here. Thank you, Brad, for helping to organize. And thank you all to the audience and the community of Huntington Beach and the students. Thank you for joining. We received hundreds of questions for this discussion. So what we did is we made it our best effort to pull it together in a series of read, think, discuss, and act. It's our hope that you'll all learn and be able to take some action into your own lives. So George Takei, he is a social justice activist. He's a social media superstar, a Grammy-nominated recording artist, a New York Times best-selling author, a pioneering actor whose career has spanned over 6 decades. He's appeared in more than 40 feature films, 100 of which are in over 100 television roles. Most famously, we all know Star Trek. And George has used his success as a platform to fight for social justice. So today we're here to learn about his graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. It's a must-read, which powerfully depicts his childhood and his family's journey and their unjustly imprisonment in U.S. Japanese American internment camps, along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans. We welcome George to Huntington Beach. Thank you so much for being with us.
Live long and prosper. And in this quarantine, stand back, stand back, stand back.
Love it. So our first section is about reading. And so we wanted to dive into your book. You wrote a graphic novel. Can you tell us why you chose to do a graphic novel versus any other type of storytelling medium?
Well, actually, They Called Us Enemy is the second iteration of the telling of my childhood imprisonment in U.S. internment camps. In 1994, I published my autobiography, my telling of the story of my life. And the beginning, naturally, is about my childhood imprisonment. And I went into great detail, but it includes a lot more after the internment, my growing up, my pursuit of an education, then the difficult decision to become an actor, given that background of mine, and my being able to persuade my father to let me pursue that career and with his support, and then to become an actor, to the trials and tribulation, and so on, all the way. In 2015, we developed a Broadway musical, of all things, based on the internment of Japanese Americans as a Broadway musical. And people thought, it's a horrible story. Why are you going to dance and sing about it? Well, we showed them how to do it. We opened in 2015 and into 2016. And so it was published as an autobiography, but still not too many people, Americans, don't know that chapter of American history. And I decided I want another way to reach a young readership, young people, preteens and teens, because they're the ones that are going to be the voters of tomorrow and hopefully movers and shakers. And when I was a teenager, I loved comic books. I was addicted to them. And at that age, you're absorbing in information through your pores. And so that's the way to reach them, but as a graphic memoir. And so we published it. The same story that I told in To the Stars in 1994, in 2019, it was published as They Called Us Enemy, because that is precisely what they called us, enemy aliens, which was totally irrational. We were not the enemy. We were Americans, and we were not aliens. I was born right here, as was my mother. My father grew up in the United States, in San Francisco, but he was born in Japan and brought over. So uh, the government behaved in an absolutely irrational way. And it wasn't until I became a teenager that my father was able to explain to me why that cruel and irrational imprisonment happened.
Wow. So I think maybe take us back a little bit on the book writing process. How long did it take you to write this story? How long did you decide, like what was that kind of process behind that? And then also your co-collaborators on this and the person, Harmony Becker, who illustrated. Tell us how you selected her to do the illustrations, and then also why black and white versus doing color illustrations.
Well, when I wrote my autobiography, that took quite some time. The writing alone was about 3 years, because I experienced the imprisonment as a child, and I wanted to root it in facts. What laws were passed by Congress and what laws were rescinded by Congress, and where they failed the ideals of American democracy. So about 3 years in just writing that. But to take just the beginning of that book and tell the story as a graphic novel involved a whole different set of disciplines. I'd like to think I love doodling, and I like to think I can draw it, but uh, we had a limited time. The story was written, and the graphic novelists, there are two involved, Justin Eisinger and Stephen Scott. They're grizzled veterans of, Stephen particularly is a veteran of comic books. Justin works on graphic memoirs. And so with their talent for breaking up a story, a scene, in visuals, because this is visual storytelling. And just like in the movies, the cinematographer helps the director on when to have a two shot and when to have a close up and when to have a point of view from the bottom. I'm a child, so looking up. So all those disciplines of visual storytelling was their job. I had finished my job in 1991. It was published in 1994. So they took the book, and if they had any detailed questions, how did such and such look, or what was the shape of that room, then I would fill them in. So most of the visualizing in terms of blocks of panels, they call them, was done by Justin and Stephen. And when it came to telling or drawing the story, I wanted ideally Japanese Americans who, in his or her family experience, um, uh, had some understanding and sensibility about the internment. But we couldn't quite find that strict description. But we found a woman who was born in Japan, raised in Japan, biracial. She's a Becker, uh, and she speaks and writes Japanese. I speak Japanese, but and my parents sent me to Japanese language school as a teenager, and so I am fluent conversationally, and I was able to write Japanese. But when you don't use it, it just evaporates. So I can't read or write Japanese. I just talk, and I love talking. So that remained with me. And in the storytelling as a comic strip, we wanted to capture the feeling of someone who's surrounded by people speaking Japanese, a Caucasian, that sense of what are they talking about? They're all talking, and I feel lost. And she was able to uh, um, fill those balloons in the written Japanese language. And her drawing captured me. She had, and particularly the way she drew 5-year-old me with the bangs.
Adorable, just adorable.
I was irresistible, so cute. And so that's how we came by Harmony. And I love her name, Harmony Becker. And she was born and raised in Japan. So she's very young. So I think she's in her early 30s. And from my vantage point, early 30s is very young. And so she had no connection with the internment experience, but she had the Japanese sensibility and the ability to write Japanese, to have those Japanese dialogue scenes written in Japanese. So, and I think she did a marvelous job.
She did. She sure did. And the emotions that you described, I felt that as reading. So she really, I'm a person of a lot of words. I'm in communication. So sometimes when you have to distill it down to just a few words, it was really, really, just really took me to the scene without having to have too much there. So I actually want to hear about your emotional state as you were crafting the story and putting this together, probably in your original biography. What was it like emotionally? Were there things that you learned about yourself, about your family, about the world? Were there things that your siblings highlighted? That did you engage your siblings in this writing process to help you put this all, pen to paper, essentially?
What was the first? It's a multi-part question.
It's a
What was the
multi-part
first part?
question. So just what was your thoughts and your feelings while you were doing?
Yes, while writing it. And that was writing To the Stars initially. I shed a lot of tears because I gained an understanding with my research, as well as talking to my father and learning from him. And then after he had passed, I was writing the story. And to think of how my parents suffered, the anguish and the sense of degradation, not only everything tangible taken away from them, but their sense of self-worth, dignity taken from them. We had a 2-bedroom home on Garnet Street in Los Angeles. And I remember that day when the soldiers came. My father, I shared a bedroom with my brother Henry, and my father came in early in the morning and woke us up and dressed us hurriedly and told us to wait in the living room while our parents did some last minute packing. My baby sister was in a cradle, and she slept in my parents' bedroom. And so my brother and I were at the front window, just gazing out at the neighborhood. And suddenly we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway. They carried rifles with shiny bayonets on them. They stomped up the front porch and with their fists began pounding on the door. I thought the whole house trembled when they pounded. And my father came out of the bedroom, answered the door, and literally at gunpoint, we were ordered out of our home. And so my father went back and got a few packages for my brother and me to carry. And he hefted 2 heavy suitcases, and we followed him out down the steps, and we stood on the driveway waiting for our mother to come out. And when she finally came out, she had our baby sister in one arm, a heavy duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. It was a terrifying morning.
I really
I couldn't imagine how they felt. And then we were taken from our home to Santa Anita Racetrack, a racetrack uh,
Here
close
and
to Los
close
Angeles.
to us. Yeah.
And we were unloaded, herded over with the other families to the stable area. And each family was assigned a stinking, smelly horse stall, still pungent with the smell of horse manure. The sense of degradation, taking their children into this narrow slot of a structure, and that's where we were going to sleep in. But for me as a 5-year-old, I was excited. I get to sleep where the horses sleep. If you breathe deeply, you could smell the horses, you know. And when we went to shower, it was outdoors where the horses were washed. And for us, Henry and me, to romp around naked outdoors in the sunshine and have water sprayed on us, it was a lot of fun. But my father, you know, I can't imagine now. And imagining what they went through to be to have everything taken away and be treated like animals and made to wash outdoors. The men went first, and then after the men were done, the women went. That kind of degradation, everything stripped from them,
Wow.
dignity. And while writing the initial autobiography, I shed many tears. And then as a teenager, I had many after dinner conversations with my father. I was very curious about our imprisonment. And, you know, in civics class, I read about the ideals of our democracy. Uh, and the quote from Abraham Lincoln, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Uh, our justice system goes on equal justice under the law and due process. When you're arrested, you have a right to know the charges, why you're arrested, and then the right to challenge those charges. And then the government or the accuser has to produce the evidence of those charges. And if they are found to be true in a court of law, then you're punished. Or if the charges aren't true, then you're freed. In our case, none of that. There were no charges, no trial, no due process. It was an un-American act. And so I was, as a teenager, getting angry, and I challenged my father. Daddy, why didn't you challenge them? Why didn't you resist? This is outrageous. It's against what America is all about. And I still remember that one conversation I'm still haunted by. I got passionate, and I said, Daddy, you led us like sheep to slaughter into the barbed wire prison camps. And suddenly the conversation exchange stopped. He was silent. And I knew immediately I had touched a nerve. I had hurt him. This man that I love, the man who bore the weight of the loss and the injustice and the rage. And a decade after that experience, now his son is hurting him. I felt I was devastated. Then he looked up and said, well, maybe you're right. And he got up, went into his bedroom, and closed the door. I I I I felt horrible. I felt like getting up and knocking on the door and apologizing, but it was awfully awkward. So I thought, well, I'll apologize tomorrow morning. In the morning, my mind will be fresh, and he will have had some time. And so I waited until tomorrow morning. And when tomorrow morning came, it was even more difficult. And I pushed it back and pushed it back, and the farther away from it that you go, the more difficult it becomes. And I never apologized, and I can't now. And I'm haunted by that feeling.
Wow.
To the man that I loved so much. And again, I was subjecting him to another pain.
Source of pain.
So, there were many tears I shed. But when I saw Harmony's drawings, uh, it was another different kind of tear. Uh, I talked about my father was a block manager, and he was a good block manager. He had to solve the problems, the tension within our block, as well as negotiate with the camp authority for extra lumber to build boardwalk, because we were in Arkansas by then, and when it was reclaimed swampland, and when it rained, the whole camp returned to being a swamp, and elderly people couldn't make that trek to the mess hall because their feet would sink into the muck, and they didn't have the strength to pull their feet out of the muck. And so young men had to carry them on their backs. And so my father organized a gang of young men to build a narrow boardwalk connecting every one of the barracks to one, the mess hall, and two, to the latrine, the intake, and the alcove. Uh, and and so uh, uh, because he did a good job, the camp authorities allowed him to borrow a Jeep and take us for a joyride outside the camp. And it was a memorable ride, and it still glows in my memory. And one of the things that uh, Harmony added was Henry and I were in the back seat, and my mother was beside him, and my baby sister was on her lap, and she showed my father and my mother holding hands. And I was so touched because they had that relationship, but I never saw it visualized like that. And that was Harmony's touch. And I, I got teared up a little bit just thinking of that. But that's the strength. My mother was a strong woman. And so my father was a diplomatic man, and he was able to deal with the oppressor, as well as depressed people in camp, or angry people, and calm them down. Uh, and uh, and that they're holding hands was such a
So
touching thing for me.
And that's actually close to my next question, is about that the book touches on many themes: love, loyalty, courage, country, parenthood, in many ways, but also dark historical events that this happened in our country, racism, fear. I can only imagine the mental torment that this leaves, and a lot of the guilt that remained. When you wrote the book, what was your hope that the reader would take away when they finished that book?
Well, because I was starting to realize when I shared something of my childhood with people that I considered to be well educated, well informed people, professionals, uh, they were aghast. They couldn't believe such a thing happened, and that shocked me, because it is such an egregious violation of who we are as Americans. And so I wrote the book in order to raise the awareness of educated people. And hopefully that got out. As a matter of fact, when 9/11 happened, uh, I was stirred. So many people, when Donald Trump signed the Muslim travel ban, it was the same mentality. We were seen through this sweeping, ill-informed generalization because we look like that, we are potential spies, potential traitors, potential fifth columnists. So lock them up without any evidence or proof of that. Innocent people, just 100% of the West Coast Japanese Americans, 120 of us, 20,000 of us to be imprisoned. And that mentality was what prompted the Muslim travel ban. But the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, I forget her name. I should have reviewed my notes there. She was an impressive, powerful, strong woman who said to Donald Trump, I will not defend this executive order because it was so egregious a violation of what we stand for as Americans. And he went down the line, he fired her and found someone who will defend it. And that pointed out to me the importance of talking about my childhood imprisonment, and that a few people were getting it. As a matter of fact, more than a few people. Many young Americans rushed to their airports to protest the Muslim travel ban, and there were attorneys who rushed to the airports to volunteer their services for Middle Eastern people landing in the United States. And so I was heartened by that, but there were so many more that did not. And the fact that they elected a president who would repeat something like that we had not learned at the top tier of our government, the lessons that we learned from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And my father taught me when we were having those discussions when I was a teenager. He said Roosevelt was a great president. In the 1930s, the nation was being crushed by this horrible depression. People, unemployed people were lining up in long lines for a bowl of soup. That's how hungry and desperate the people were back then. And just to raise their spirit and to get them activated, he said, there is nothing to, Roosevelt said, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And he did indeed pull the nation up from that depression. But after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, we were totally unprepared. Pearl Harbor was a sneak attack, and here's the whole West Coast exposed and unprepared. And so President Roosevelt became fearful, and the nation was swept up in war hysteria, fear hysteria, and the leader was led by the masses. And he signed on February 19th, Executive Order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans to be imprisoned. And so there are many lessons to be learned, and it's in little steps. We got the Deputy Attorney General, and it's going to
Sally Yates.
Sally Yates, that's the name.
Thank you to the audience members.
Oh, they prompted you. That is somewhere back there filed away. But I've reached that point in life. You know, it's like a water pitcher. It gets filled as the years go by. But I have way past the point where this is filled to capacity, and a lot of information just overflows down the side. And I think Sally Yates was one of the names that flowed out, but she is one of my heroes. Amazing, strong woman, and someday she herself should be Attorney General of the United States. We will benefit from her wisdom and experience.
Wonderful. So we have a lot more questions. So one actually came directly from the audience, and it was, how do you reconcile your appreciation for American culture and the things that led you to a very successful career and, you know, as an actor and as an entertainer, with the injustices of your life experience over the course of your life, what advice do you have for the young people that are listening today that maybe feel that our country does not recognize their identity or who they are? What is your advice for them to power through?
That was the advice my father gave me when I was a teenager engaged in those discussions. He said, "This is a people's democracy. Those ideals are noble ideals, but they're just words. They don't take on substance, meaning, and the truth unless the people infuse them, those words. All men are created equal, or equal justice under the law, due process. They're just words. We have to be engaged. It's a participatory democracy, and we have to participate in it. And he encouraged my brother and me from the time that we were very young to be actively engaged. And he said, student government is a part of that. Uh, um, your friend Bobby Thompson is running for athletic commissioner at your middle school. Make posters and help him out. And once we got Bobby Thompson elected, he said, well, you should get Bobby Thompson now to support you for health commissioner. And so I was elected health commissioner. And in middle school, I became student body president, which I'm a gregarious guy. And I love people, and I have made a lot of friends. And I love competition. As a matter of fact, when I was a volunteer at the American Red Cross, and I had access to a lot of Red Cross buttons. And so when I campaigned for health commissioner, I thanked everybody and shook their hands, and I left in the hand that I shook a Red Cross button. So I was known as a Red Cross candidate. All the people that I shook hands with got a Red Cross button. And when I ran for student body president, my father had a grocery store. He eventually went back into real estate, but he did many other businesses before the Japanese American community was in a point to be buying homes or businesses. And so he had the grocery store, and he was able to get these little hard candies at wholesale prices, real dirt cheap, maybe a dozen for a penny. And when I ran for student body president and I shook hands, I left a hard candy in each hand.
You know, clever. You were building your marketing muscle and learning to connect with people. I think that's brilliant. I remember running for student body, and I think I promised soda in the water fountains or something along those lines.
But did you deliver that?
I did not, but I think I have planned some event where we could issue out sodas. So,
well, I gave them proof that I can deliver by leaving that sweet something in their hands before they voted for me. So I earned their vote. And so my father encouraged us to be participants in our society generally. And he said, we are the ones that are going to give meaning to those words, those noble ideals. And one afternoon, Saturday afternoon, he took me downtown and he said, let's volunteer for Adlai Stevenson for president. And we volunteered at his headquarters. Actually, I did not volunteer. I just tagged along with my father, but he loved to tell people that we volunteered for the Adlai Stevenson. And here again, you know, an election campaign has all of the theatrics, suspense, excitement, rah-rah, building to a crescendo. And that appealed to me. But also I understood what my father meant by participatory democracy. Here's this man from, actually, Stevenson was born in Los Angeles. He pointed out to me the house on Adams Boulevard, which is an area of old mansions. And that was where Adlai Stevenson was born. But he went on to be elected governor of Illinois and became a very good governor and an eloquent speaker and an inspiring speaker. And so I began to understand what my father meant by a participatory democracy. And he said, you are a volunteer for Red Cross. That's good. That's what makes our society better. And when the mayor asks you to serve on a commission, that's volunteer work too. And if the president of the United States asks you to serve on a commission, and so I have served on civic commissions. I was on the board of the Southern California Rapid Transit District, appointed by a mayor I helped elect, the only African-American mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, and the most successful mayor we've had in the history of Los Angeles, re-elected 4 times.
Wow.
Served for 20 years, no, 5 times, 20 years as the mayor of Los Angeles. And I was a Clinton supporter, Bill Clinton, and I served on the U.S.-Japan Friendship Commission. And so that was what my father meant by participating in government. And this is the story I tell people, that we are the ones that make our government good, bad, indifferent. We make the difference. And if we have a horrible administration, that's our fault. I didn't vote that way, but you guys did. And if we have a good, inspiring administration that moves the country forward, that's because we supported that candidate. So I got an understanding of participatory democracy. It's the most fragile kind of democracy because we Japanese Americans experienced its failure, but we've also seen its glorious advances in human society.
That's so great. So we're going to get to our last section of ACT, and
This is also ACT, though. Active participation in government and society.
Everyone write that note down.
It's acting on it.
Taking part, yes. And so we're always trying to bring the community together. And that's what these 2 groups, and that's why we were fortunate to bring you here today, is that we want to bring the community together. You've always been a leader and an integral part of bringing awareness to the Japanese American community, but also you've brought a bond. And we just want to know from you, how do you build and foster community and bonds? And how do you move forward when you have dark things in the past, in the back seat?
Again, active participation. I was active in presidential campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns for U.S. Senator. And so I was active on that basis. But I was also active in the Japanese American community in support of those candidates. I leafleted for George Brown for U.S. Senate, or we found a friend of mine owned a building in Little Tokyo in downtown Los Angeles. And Little Tokyo is at the bottom of the hill that our civic center is on. And my friend's building had a blank wall that everyone can see driving down the hill toward Little Tokyo. And so I asked him, can you donate that wall to us for about 3 months of the campaign? And he was a good friend, and he said, yeah, go ahead. And so we put a huge Tom Bradley for mayor sign up there, got great visibility for him. And when I was also a McGovern delegate to the Democratic Convention and a supporter of George McGovern. So I was a real progressive liberal.
Very active.
Yes, and he happened to have a vacancy storefront on the sidewalk level, and so I asked him to donate that for the McGovern headquarters. And I guess I'm persuasive. He did agree to that. I had to buy. He owned a manju shop, a Japanese confection, a sweet pounded rice confection. And so I had to buy a lot of manjus, but he agreed to let us have the empty spot. And I got my niece, she was a cute little 4 or 5 year old. I dressed her up in a kimono to welcome Mrs. McGovern, Eleanor McGovern, for the grand opening of the McGovern Little Tokyo headquarters. And so I engaged the Japanese American community. So I was active in the community as well as active in the larger community. Activism, to be actively engaged in both society. I don't consider them both separate societies. I'm Japanese Americans and I'm of the Japanese American community, but I'm an American and I'm actively involved in the American community as well. And I have a candidate that I think is a good candidate, and I want to bring everybody's support, the larger American community as well as the Japanese American community. Practice what you preach. I preach participation in government and society. And so I was active in the civil rights movement. You know, people say, how do you get allies for your particular issue? Well, you get allies by being an ally. I was active in the civil rights movement at that time and in the African American community. I marched with Dr. King. And so I had African American friends. I was active in the peace movement during the Vietnam War, a war that was dividing the country. You know, those that passionately supported the war and those who were equally passionately for peace, not engaging there. And so we have to be involved, not separately. Say that that's the Japanese American community, and this is the American community. They're both my community. I'm an American and happen to be Japanese Americans. I don't separate them. It's working together and being an ally, because when it comes to a Japanese American issue, I was able to get allies from African Americans, or the peace movement, non-Japanese Americans. We become allies by being an ally.
Absolutely. And, you know, your story is obviously so powerful. And we know that there's more stories. You know, yours was one story of many, 120,000. Is there any books, museums? Obviously, we know of a big museum, but books, museums, things, social media accounts, places that our students and our community can go to get more information and learn more about the past?
Number one, I am one of the founders of the Japanese American National Museum and a former chairman of the board. They decided to give me the title Chairman Emeritus. Every chairman doesn't get that title, and I'm still on the board of trustees there. That is the preeminent place if someone doing research on the internment of Japanese American is doing some research on it. That's the place to come. There are government documents there. I testified at our campaign to get an apology and redress from the United States government. And a copy of that testimony I made is there. And it's been published elsewhere. In fact, I'll have Brad send you a copy of that to share with the Huntington Beach readership. And I get started on an issue and I forget the point I was driving at.
So where can they find resources?
Oh yes, Japanese American National Museum, where I found a book where I found a lot of an encyclopedic tome is a book written by this woman named Michi Nishimoto Weglin, Weglyn. She was, they're both dead now. She wrote this encyclopedic book on the internment of Japanese Americans, and it's called Years of Infamy. when Pearl Harbor was bombed, President Roosevelt said it's a day of infamy. But we went through years of infamy, more than 4 years, the duration of the war plus, because we were released in dribs and drabs. And our family was released in February of 1946. 1945, August, was when the war ended.
Wow. So how do we help our kids and ourselves from thinking about these injustices of the past? How do we prevent them from happening in the future?
Everything that I've said already. We are the ones that are going to be responsible for, or for good or bad, by the degree of our active engagement, participation in a participatory democracy. That's the whole point of my book. I want to prevent that sort of thing from happening. When I first wrote To the Stars, and actually I shamelessly used Star Trek to sell the book. On the cover, you'll see me looking to the stars, but dressed in my Starfleet uniform. And the latter part has a lot about my Star Trek experience, working with the cast and the trials and tribulations of we were low rated when we were on first run. So all the trials and tribulations of keeping the show alive and sustaining it, and the failure of our effort to sustain it after 3 seasons.
That's great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and she's going to ask a few questions for as long as we have time. We got a lot coming in from the audience, and I know there were some things about closed captioning, and I apologize. I just couldn't figure out how to get it going as I was talking. But Liz will ask a few questions, and then she'll turn it over. I have one final question for you, and then we will wrap up. So Liz, take it away.
So we've had a lot of questions come in from our surveys and from the chat, but one of the questions that came up a lot was, why did you choose Huntington Beach? Why are you coming and talking to us today? Not that we aren't excited, because trust me, we are very excited.
I didn't choose Huntington Beach. You asked me, and so I said yes. But there's another reason. Huntington Beach and generally the Orange County area had a lot of Japanese immigrant farmers who farmed there. And when I was a teenager and my father was telling me about participation in our society, this was back in the 50s, I saw on the front page of the LA Times a shot of beautiful fresh strawberries rotting on the vine, mile after mile of strawberries, because of the ban of braceros. That was the term that they use. Mexican farm laborers were being banned because of the usual immigration issue there. And I was, as a teenager, I loved, well, I still love strawberries, and I hated to see them rotting away and the whole year's crop being wasted. So I tried to organize some of my friends at school to volunteer to pick those strawberries. And the only other volunteer that I could get from school was an African-American runner friend, Earl Gravely. And so my father drove the two of us bright and early one morning to the East LA Farm Labor Center. And they drove us by truck to a strawberry farm in Orange County. And that is the day that I learned the meaning of the word backbreaking. I always thought that was to describe some exhausting work, but it literally broke my back, bent over and picking strawberries. And so the question was what? I forgot the question.
Why us? Why?
Because I personally have the strawberry farm happened to be in Orange County, and I had and it happened to be a Japanese American owned strawberry farm, and that's all coincidence. I didn't select my father. I mean, the farm labor board drove us out to a farm, and so there is a Japanese American history in Orange County and Huntington Beach. And there is a woman in Orange County who is working passionately to preserve a piece of Orange County or Huntington Beach history called Wintersburg, where uh, uh, what was the crop? I think the crop was chili pepper. There was a very successful Japanese immigrant chili pepper farmer. He became very successful, very wealthy, the leading cherry pepper farmer in Orange County. And he had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor, as did any of us, but he had to forcefully be imprisoned and give up all that he had worked so hard for. And the government, apparently there's some preservation effort and some opposition by the local people there who had taken a position against preserving some of the built history. I'm a member, I've been a decades long, lifetime a member of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And it's those very structures and pieces of history that is important to be preserved. And the Wintersburg village story is an important one that is under threat right now. So for a lot of reasons, I did not choose. When I was invited, I leaped at the opportunity eagerly.
And we really appreciate that. We have Mary Urashima, and she's the one I think you might be talking about.
Yes.
And so she's actually with us today, and people named her. And also Fountain Valley was the first city to actually, one of our high schools.
Yes, I know, a Japanese American mayor, right?
Yes, and our feeder schools, like we have Masuda and a few others who were named after Japanese Americans, and that one was a war hero. So we are so happy and proud, and I am so happy that our audience is jumping in with pride to help fill that in. One last question, Jen, do we have time for one more?
One more, yep. Go.
Okay. And I think this is a really important one that has come up in a lot of different ways. And how have you managed to maintain a positive American identity amidst the hate? And or what advice do you have for young people listening today when they feel like a part of their identity is not valued by their country?
I am an American. I'm a proud American because I understand how fragile our American values can be. We experienced it when this country was swept up by mindless, cruel hysteria. And I take it as a personal responsibility to be guided by my father. I feel I was really blessed by an extraordinary man as a father, because so many Japanese American fathers of my parents' generation don't want to talk about it. They're silent on it because, for understandable reasons, because it was such a painful experience. But that pain should galvanize them to work to prevent this sort of outrage from happening again. But so they haven't shared any of their experience with their own children. When we did Allegiance on Broadway, we had many people come backstage to tell us how moved they were by the story that we told. And many of them were young Japanese Americans. And when they said, oh, my parents or my grandparents were in camp, I would ask them, oh, which camp were they in? Because perhaps they were in the same camps that we were. We were in 3 different camps. We were transferred around, and their faces would be blank. I said, do you know where their camp was? Was it in Arkansas, Wyoming, Idaho, Arizona? It's a blank because their parents didn't talk to them about it. So my mission isn't just to raise the awareness of this chapter of American history for all Americans, but especially for younger Japanese Americans whose parents or grandparents didn't tell them about the details. They know that, you know, they were in camp, but it's an anonymous camp. They don't know the name of it. We were in Rower, Arkansas. The name of the camp was Camp Rower. And we were transferred from there to Tule Lake uh, uh, segregation camp. We were in segregation because this is a whole another story. A year into imprisonment, a year after they stripped us of everything, they came down with a loyalty questionnaire demanding loyalty. Right after Pearl Harbor, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the US Army. This was an act of patriotism that was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy alien, as we all were, even 5-year-old me. I was an enemy and an alien, which was ridiculous if it weren't so outrageous. And these guys volunteering to serve in the US military as patriotic Americans, to categorize them as enemy aliens, was almost lunacy. And then they were imprisoned. But then a year into imprisonment, the government realizes that there's a wartime manpower shortage. And here are all these young people that they could have had, but had labeled enemy alien. How do you justify drafting out of a barbed wire prison camp enemy aliens for service in the US military? It was a dilemma which they solved with an answer that is as irrational as the internment itself was, to demand loyalty after they've done all this to you, impoverished you, imprisoned you, degraded you, insulted you. And the questionnaire itself was insulting. There were two key questions. There were about 30 questions, but the two key questions that they expected yes answers to. Question 27 asked, will you bear arms to defend the United States of America? This being asked of my parents. They had 3 young children. By that time, I was 6, my brother was 5, my baby sister was a toddler. They were being asked to abandon their children and bear arms to defend the country that's imprisoning their children. It didn't make sense at all. It was preposterous. The next question, question 28, was one sentence with 2 conflicting ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? Your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. They presumed, just because we look like this, that we had an inborn racial loyalty to the Emperor of Japan, which was insulting. So if you answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor to forswear, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, that applied to the second part, meant that you were confessing that you did have an inborn loyalty to the emperor that you were now prepared to forswear and repledge your loyalty to the United States. My parents said, this is outrageous. This is insulting. This is stupid. We're not going to kowtow to this kind of madness. And they both answered no to those 2. And they were categorized as disloyal and transferred to the Tule Lake camp in Northern California which is symbolic of the epitome of the cruelty and the stupidity of the imprisonment. They called it a segregation camp for disloyals. My parents were not disloyal. They answered those two questions truthfully, honestly. They had integrity. But the amazing thing is, thousands of young men and women were so desperate to get out of imprisonment that they bit the bullet, swallowed the ugly taste, and answered yes to those offensive questions. And they were drafted out of the imprisonment and put into a segregated, all Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and sent to the battlefields of Europe. There, they were literally used like cannon fodder. Wave after wave after wave of Japanese Americans going in, getting gunned down, the next wave coming, gunned down, the next wave. They sustained the highest combat casualty rate of any other, this is a rate, the percentage, the highest combat casualty rate of any unit, American unit in the Second World War. But they fought with incredible courage and ferocity, and many of them heroically. And when the war ended, they came back, the 442nd came back as a single most decorated unit of the entire Second World War. They were greeted back on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." But there was another group of young men that I consider really true American heroes, more than the ones that went and fought. They said, "I'm an American and I will fight for my country, but I will fight as an American. If I can report to my hometown draft board with my family back home, I would be like any American. I will have something to fight for. I will fight as an American, but I will not go as an internee, leaving my family in imprisonment to put on the same uniform as that of the sentries guarding over my family. I will fight as an American." This was a gutsy stance to take on the full might of the United States government, but it was also a principled stand, a truthful stand, and an admirable, for me, an admirable stand, and an American stance. And for that, they were tried for draft evasion, found guilty, and transferred from a barbed wire prison camp to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. These men were strong men. They were all men, no women. They were strong men, and they were fighters, and they had a different battlefield than those that went to foreign battlefields. Their battlefield was behind the tall concrete walls of a federal penitentiary, where they were insulted, spat on, and harassed by the other convicts. But one was a judo teacher, and many of them knew judo, and they quickly gained the respect of the other convicts. They are true American heroes. And so the loyalty questionnaire fractured the Japanese American community. Those like my parents and those that stood on principle and were imprisoned at federal penitentiary, and those that bit the bullet, swallowed the ugly taste, and went and fought heroically. 21 of them ultimately got the Medal of Honor, the highest military recognition the government can grant. It is a tragic and stirring history that we have, an American history.
Wow. So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. We are going to save the chat and we will send you transcribe the chat and also the questions, because we certainly couldn't address all of the questions coming from the audience. We did put into the chat your website, as well as a link to purchase the book. Is there any other places that people can find you to learn more, to connect with you in some way?
Well, I had in the year 2020, a whole calendar full of speaking engagements all over the country. They were all canceled. And now that we are, and I can't emphasize enough to everybody, get vaccinated. There are some people that are resisting vaccination, and that's affecting the rest of us. We need everyone to get vaccinated. It's a patriotic duty, and certainly a human duty to the rest of humankind. We are dependent on you. And some of these people that are resisting getting a vaccination, they don't understand. They're not scientists. They are arrogant people. Please get some humility and I hardly felt it, but please get vaccinated. We will and this is another form of active participation by just exposing your bare arm and getting that injection. I hardly felt it. And I know some people have had some uncomfortable reactions, kind of a brain fog and exhaustion. But both Brad and I went through it swimmingly, and we are now invincible. Become invincible, please.
Well, thank you so much. We are going to share all of these comments. We're getting so many coming in, and we want to thank you for your time, your insights, opening up a piece of your heart. I know that there was a lot of tough moments that you had to share, but we really understand and love what you have taught us today. I think if everyone uses the hashtag active participation, I think that is like the word of the day. And I think it's a good way to wrap up. We're a little over, so tell Brad, sorry. And I just want to say thank you. And I wish you all the best. And thank you, Huntington Beach community. Hopefully I'll see you out at the beach one of these days. And yes.
I wish you all live long and prosper. And
Great.
Stand back.
Thank you so much. Thank you, George.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Few more chats are coming in, so people are starting to drop off, but I'll get the rest of the conversation. Yay.
Great. That was fun.
So fun. Thank you.
It's a nice, lively chat that we had.
Yes.
And the word is going out. We're spreading the word. And it's the next generation of voters that are being galvanized, hopefully.
Absolutely.
And thank you for this opportunity to do that.
Thank you for participating. We really appreciate it. By the way, you and your husband shared the same anniversary year, 2008, that my husband and I share.
Bravo, bravo.
Congratulations when your anniversary comes by.
That was the year, wasn't it?
That was the year,
Yes.
that little period of time. Anyway, active participation.
Active
Okay,
participation.
thank you.
David, were you able to save any of the questions in the Q&A?
I did. I copied and pasted it.
Awesome. Perfect. I couldn't.
That also saves the Q&A. So I just copied and pasted them really fast.
I did too.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Can I sign off?
You can sign off and we'll send you a follow-up.
Wonderful. Thank you.
so much.
So much
Pleasure.
pleasure.
And I'm going to just save the chat and end the conversation. There's still about 200 people left on. So
And yeah, it's just us now.
it's just us.
Let's see if they drop faster.
They're coming up.
They're done. They don't want